All right, this is chapter 2 of The Legend of Hiram, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. This chapter is entitled The Entered Apprentice. All right, I don't have my microphone for this recording, so I'm not sure if the audio is going to sound different from the last ones I did, because I'm traveling right now. I'm recording this from a hotel up in Lake Tahoe. All right, let's get started. There are 3 grand steps in the unfoldment of the human soul before it completes the dwelling place of the spirit. These have been called, respectively, youth, manhood, and old age, or, as the Mason would say, the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master builder. All life passes through these 3 grand stages of human consciousness. They can be listed as the man on the outside looking in, the man going in, and the man inside. The path of human life is governed, as all things are, by the laws of analogy, and as at birth, we start our pilgrimage through youth, manhood, and old age. So the spiritual consciousness of man, in his cosmic path of unfoldment, passes from unconscious to perfect consciousness in the grand lodge of the universe. Before the initiation of the entered apprentice degree can be properly understood and accepted, certain requirements must be considered, not merely those of the physical world, but also those of the spiritual world. In the sentence I just read where it says, before the initiation of the entered apprentice, there's a little asterisk marked by the word initiation. And then there's a footnote at the bottom that says, initiation is the process of being instructed in the process of causes and causation which lie behind every effect of nature. The Mason must realize that his true initiation is a spiritual and not a physical ritual, and that his initiation into the living temple of the spiritual hierarchy regulating Masonry may not occur until years after he has taken the physical degree, or spiritually he may be a Grand Master before he comes into the world. There are probably a few examples in the entire history of Masonry where the spiritual ordination of the aspiring seeker took place at the time of the physical initiation, because the true initiation depends upon the building of certain soul qualities, an individual and personal matter which is left entirely to the conscious effort of the mystic Mason, and which he must carry out in silence and alone. The court of the tabernacle of the ancient Jews was divided into 3 parts: the outer court, the holy place, and the most holy of holies. These 3 divisions represent the 3 grand divisions of human consciousness. The degree of entered apprentice is acquired when the student signifies his initiation to the rough ashlar, which he cuts from the quarry, and prepare it for the truing of the fellow craft. And when they say ashlar, there's a footnote down here. It says they're talking about a stone or block of granite. In other words, the first degree is really one of preparations. It is a material step dealing with the material things, for all spiritual life must be raised upon the material foundation. 7 is the number of the entered apprentice as it relates to the 7 liberal arts and sciences, and these are the powers with which the entered apprentice must labor before he is worthy to go onward into more elevated and advanced degrees. Those who believe they can reach the spiritual planes of nature without first passing through and conquering by conquering mold matter into expressions of spiritual power are much mistaken, for the first stage in the growth of a Master Mason is the mastery of the concrete conditions of life and the developing through exercise on this plane of nature, senses, centers, which will later become channels for the expression of spiritual truths. All growth is a gradual procedure carried on in an orderly, masterly way, as is shown by opening and closing of the lodge. The universe is divided into groups, and these groups are divided from each other by the rates of vibration which pass through them. As spiritual consciousness is carried through the chain, those who are lower lose connection with it, and when it has raised itself above their level, until finally only the Grand Masters are capable of remaining in session and and unknown even to the Master Mason, it passes back again to the spiritual hierarchy from which it came. There's a little footnote down here at the bottom. It says the 7 liberating arts and sciences are astronomy, music, geometry, arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, and grammar. I've talked about that before. It's called it's also known as the trivium and the quadrivium. And the trivium, it's referring to where 3 roads meet, and that's the grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And when you can understand grammar, logic, and rhetoric and systematically question it, then you're able to go out into the world and actually navigate all the information that's going to be presented to you, and you'll be able to identify what is real and what is false by systematically questioning things. So the grammar, logic, rhetoric, that's like the who, what, where, when, how, and why. And then so that's the first part of the 7 liberating arts is the trivium, and the next part is the quadrivium. And then so after you learn the basics, which is the grammar, logic, rhetoric, then you get into the more advanced stuff, which is astronomy, music, geometry, and arithmetic. And then once you have all that, the 7 liberating arts, now you have wisdom, and you're able to go out into the world and efficiently navigate. All right, let's continue. Action is the lost key of the entered apprentice lodge. All growth is the result of exercise and the heightening of vibratory rates. Raising your vibration. It's a lot of the same stuff they talk about in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. It is through exercise that the muscles of the human body are strengthened. It is through the 7 liberal arts and sciences that the mind of man receives certain impulses, which in turn start into action centers of consciousness within himself. These centers of consciousness will later, through still greater development, give fuller expression to these inner powers, but the entered apprentice has as his first duty the awakening of these powers, and, like the youth of whom he is a symbol, his ideals and mind and labors must be tied closely to concrete things. For him, both points of the compass are under the square. For him, the reasons which manifest through the heart and the mind, the 2 polarities of expression, are darkened and concealed beneath the square which measures the block of bodies. He knows not the reason why his work is to do and to follow the directions of those whose knowledge is greater than his own, but as the result of his doing and the application of energies through action and reaction, he slowly builds and evolves the powers of discrimination and the strength of character which mark the fellow craft degree. Of course, through rough ashlar symbolizes the body. It also represents cosmic root substance, which is taken out of the quarry of the universe by the first expressions of intelligence and molded by them into ever finer and more perfect lines, until finally it becomes the perfect stone for the builder's temple. How can emotion manifest save through form? How can mind manifest until the intrinsically evolved brain cells of matter have raised their organic quality to form the groundwork upon which other things may be based, all students of human nature realize that every expression of man depends upon organic quality, that in every living thing this differs, and that the fineness of this pattern is the sure indication of growth, mental, physical, or spiritual. True, the doctrines of his craft, the entered apprentice must beautify his temple. He must build within himself by his actions, by the power of his hand and the tools of his craft, certain qualities which make possible his initiation into the higher degrees of the spiritual lodge. We know that the cube block is symbolic of the tomb. It is also well known that the entered apprentice is not capable of rolling away the stone or of transmuting it into a greater or higher thing, but it is his privilege to glorify that stone, to purify it, and to begin the great work of preparing it for the temple of his king. Few realize that the universe is made up of individuals in various stages of development, that consequently responsibility is individual, and that everything which man wishes to gain he must himself build and maintain. If he is to use his finer bodies for the things for which they were intended, he must treat them right, that they must be good and faithful servants in the great work that he is preparing himself to do. The quarries represents the great powers of natural resource. They are symbolic of the practically endless field of human opportunity. They symbolize the cosmic substance from which man must gather the stones of his temple. At this stage in his growth, he is privileged to gather the stones which he wishes to true during his path through the lodge, for at this point he symbolizes the youth who is choosing the work of his life. He represents the human ego who in the dawn of time gathered many blocks and cubes and broken stones from the great quarry. These rough and broken stones that will not fit into anything are the partially evolved powers and senses with which he labors. In the first state, he must gather these things, and those who have not gathered them can never true them. During the involutionary period of human consciousness, the entered apprentice in the Great Lodge was man who labored with these rough blocks, seeking the tools and the power with which to true them. As he evolves down through the ages, he gains the tools and cosmically passes on to the degree of fellow craft, where he trues his ashlar in harmony with the plans upon the master's tracing board, which rough, uncut ashlar has 3 dimensions, which represents the 3 ruffians who at this stage are destroyers of the 4th dimensional life concealed within the ugly, ill-shaped stone. The lost key of the entered apprentice is service. Why, he may not ask when he does not know. His work is to do, to act, to express himself in some way, constructively if possible, but destructively rather than not at all. Without action, he loses his great work. Without tools, which symbolize the body, he cannot act in an organized manner. Consequently, it is necessary to master the arts and sciences which place in his hands intelligent tools for the expression of energy. Beauty is the keynote to his ideal. With his concrete ideals, he must beautify all with which he comes in contact, so that the works of his hand may be acceptable in the eyes of the great architect of the universe. So I think they're talking about God, maybe, when they say the great architect of the universe, or the God consciousness, the higher unified consciousness in which everything manifests. It's very funny how they the current public education system that children are indoctrinated into, they don't teach any of this. They don't teach you how to systematically question things. They don't teach you grammar, logic, rhetoric. They don't teach you the 7 liberating arts. They just teach you a bunch of BS, algebra, bunch of fake history, and a bunch of BS about getting good grades and getting a job and being a slave. All right, let's continue. His daily life, in his home, in his business, among his fellow creatures, and his realization of the fundamental unity of each with all form the base upon which the aspiring candidate may rise a greater superstructure. In truth, he must live the life, the result of which is the purification of his being, so that the finer and more attenuated forces of the higher degrees may express themselves through the fine adjustments of the receiving pole within himself. When he reaches this stage in his growth, he is spiritually worthy to consider advancement into a higher degree. The advancement is not the result of election or balloting, but an automatic process in which, having raised his consciousness by his life, he attunes himself to the next step above his present position. All initiations are the result of adjustments of the evolving life with the physical, emotional, and mental planes of consciousness through which it passes. We may now consider the spiritual requirements of one who feels that he would mystically correlate himself with the great spiritual fraternity which, concealed behind the exoteric rite, forms the living, breathing power of the entered Apprentice Lodge. And then it says, 1. It is absolutely necessary that an entered apprentice should have studied sufficiently the laws of anatomy to have at least a general idea of the physical body, for the entire degree is based upon the mystery of form. The human body is the highest manifestation of it which he is capable of analyzing. Consequently, he must devote himself to the study of his own being and its wondrous mysteries and complications. 2. The entered apprentice must realize that his body is the living temple of the living God and treat it accordingly, for when he abuses or mistreats it, he breaks the sacred obligations which he must assume before he can ever hope to understand the true mysteries of the craft. The breaking of his pact with the higher lives evolving within himself brings with it tremendous natural penalty. 3. He must study the problems of the maintenance of bodies through food, clothing, breathing, and other necessities, as all of these are important steps in the entered apprentice lodge. Those who eat improperly, dress improperly, and use only 1/3 of their lung capacity can never have the physical efficiency necessary for the fullest expression of their higher being. It's pretty interesting to talk about only using 1/3 of their lung capacity. I think this might be referring to some kind of a meditation, or the way that these yogis, how they have all these breathing techniques that give them access to higher consciousness, and or like how that dude, his name's Wim Hof, how he can control his body temperature through breathing techniques. Like the guy's, he holds like the world record for being submerged in ice water, and he just controls his body temperature through breathing. He climbed Mount Everest with no shirt on, and he has this whole, it's like a camp, or like a training that people can pay money to go through, and he'll mentor people into how to do these breathing techniques to where they can withstand extremely cold temperatures and be perfectly fine. All right, let's continue. Number 4 says he must grow physically and in the expression of concrete things. His realization of the position of man to man must be learned well at this time, and he must seek to unfold all unselfish qualities which are necessary for the harmonious workings of the Mason and his fellow men on the physical plane of nature. 5. He must seek to round out all inequalities. He can best do this by balancing his mental and physical organisms through the application and study of the 7 liberating arts and sciences. There it is again, that education that's been removed from the United States intentionally to dumb people down. The 7 liberating arts and sciences. Like, if everyone was taught that in public school, the world would be a lot different. Let's just say that. We'd have a lot more freedom, a lot more prosperity, and people wouldn't be so freaking stupid. Like with what we see now, like all these sheeple people walking around wearing masks and shit. All right, let's continue. Until he is relative master of these principles on the highest plane, within his own being, he cannot hope spiritually to attract to himself, through the powers of his own expression, the life-giving ray of the fellow craft. When he reaches this point, however, he is spiritually ready to hope for membership in a more sublime degree. The Mason must realize that he is what his innermost motives are, and those who allow material consideration, social position, financial or business possibility, or selfish materialistic ideals to lead them into the Masonic Brotherhood must realize that they have automatically separated themselves from the craft. They can never do any harm to Masonry by getting in because they cannot get in. Sitting comfortably in a seat in the lodge, they may feel that they have deceived the Grand Master of the universe, but when the spiritual lodge meets to carry on the true work of Masonry, they are non-entitled and absent. Watch fobs, stick pins, and other material insignia do not make Masons, neither does the ritual ordain them. They are evolved through the self-conscious effort to live up to the highest and greatest within themselves. Their lives are the insignia of their rank, greater far than any visible, tangible credential. Bearing this thought in mind, it is possible for the unselfish aspiring soul to become spiritually and liberally vouched for by the centers of consciousness as the entered apprentice. It means he has taken the first grand step on the path of personal liberation. He is now symbolized as the child with the smiling face, for with the simplicity of the child, he is placing himself under the protection of his great spiritual father, willing and glad to obey each of his demands. Having reached this point and having done the best which it was possible for him to do, he is in position to hope that the powers that be, moving in their mysterious manner, may find him worthy to take the second great step into spiritual liberation. And then there's like one more paragraph at the end of this chapter, and it's entitled Friendship. What nobler thing can any mortal be than a friend? What nobler compliment can man bestow than friendship? The bonds and ties of the life we know break easily, but through eternity one bond remains, the bond of fellowship, the fellowship of atoms, of stardust, and its endless flight of suns and worlds, of gods and men. The clasped hands of comradeship of those who have come to recognize the fellowship of spirit unite in a bond eternal. I wonder if he's talking about, like, when he's talking about the atoms and the stardust going from endless flights of suns and worlds. I mean, he's talking about how we're incarnating on different worlds all over the universe. And even though we may be experiencing some of these lives subjectively through the 5 sensory organs of a human avatar body, but in the long run of things, in the spiritual world, we're all connected eternally. Who is more desolate than the friendless one? Who is more honored than one whose virtues have given him a friend? To have a friend is good. To be a friend is better. The noblest title ever given man, the highest title bestowed by the gods, the noblest appellation was given when the great Jove, or Jove, Jove, not exactly sure how they would pronounce that in here, but it says, was given to the great Jove, gazed down upon Prometheus, and said, behold, a friend of man. Who serves man's serves God. This is the symbol of the fellowship of your craft, for the plan of God is upheld by the clasped hands of friends, by the clasped hands of friends. The bonds of relationship must pass, but the friend remains. Serve God by being a friend of the soul of man, serving his needs, lighting his steps, making smooth his way. Let the world of its own accord say of the Mason, behold, the friend of all. Let the world say of the Lodge, this is indeed a fraternity of brothers, comrades in spirit and truth. That is the end of chapter 2. We'll go ahead and stop the video right here, and then I will continue chapter 3 in a separate upload. Let me know what you think. Any comments, any concerns? It's pretty interesting stuff, in my opinion. A lot of similar stuff that was talked about in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, or the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. A lot of stuff about the universe and consciousness and atoms and the law of attraction and raising your vibration. All right, that's it for now. I'll see you guys in the next video.